The prairie breathed heat like a living thing. Laya Harlow walked toward the last ranch on Earth like a ghost, with nothing but a battered satchel and a name so poisoned no one in town would even sell her a loaf of bread. She was looking for a place to disappear. What she found was a war she didn't know she was meant to fight. The sun was a merciless eye in a blistering blue sky. Dust lifted in golden spirals, coating her worn dress, clinging to the sweat on her skin. She didn't hurry. Hurrying made a person look desperate, and desperate girls got sent packing. She already knew what that felt like. "We don't need trouble here, girl," the shopkeeper's wife had said, her arms folded, her voice cold as old glass. "Not after what your kin pulled back east." So Laya had turned and left, and the dust had swallowed her footsteps. Now the ranch sat ahead, a scatter of low-slung buildings, a windmill squealing on every third rotation. This was it, the last place between here and nowhere. A deep bark ripped through the air. A rangy cattle dog shot across the yard, hackles raised. Laya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then a voice cut through the heat, low and commanding. "Easy, Scout." The man who stepped from the barn's shadow was tall enough to blot out a piece of the sky. He moved with a quiet certainty, a man who lived in a world of work and silence. He looked at her the way a man might look at a thunderhead on the horizon, measuring, gauging if it would break over him or pass on by. Laya swallowed the dust in her throat and made herself meet his eyes. "I don't talk much, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest, "but I can cook." The man, Caleb McGrath, didn't answer right away. He just wiped his hands on a rag, considering her. The silence stretched, filled only by the creak of the windmill. Finally, he nodded once, a slow tilt of his chin toward the house. "Kitchen's that way," he said, his voice a deep, unhurried drawl. "You can make a meal. We'll see." The words weren't kind, but they weren't cruel. They were a chance. The kitchen was plain but orderly. Laya set her satchel down and got to work. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd stretched meals with imagination and fed a family on scraps. She found flour, salt, lard. She stoked the still warm stove, coaxing a flame from the coals. Soon, the kitchen filled with the smell of rising biscuits and sizzling bacon fat. Caleb stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, watching her with a stillness that felt like judgment. She set the golden biscuits on the table, a pot of beans revived with bacon drippings, and coffee brewed strong enough to bite. She didn't wait for thanks. She just stepped back, her eyes down. He took a seat, the chair scraping loud against the floorboards. He broke a biscuit in half, steam curling between his fingers, and took a bite. Chewed slowly. His face gave nothing away. At last, he nodded once. "You'll stay on for now." Relief surged through her, hot and dizzying. Later, when the dishes were scrubbed clean, she stepped onto the porch. The wind had cooled. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the wide, darkening land. From inside, she heard Caleb speak softly. "Scout," he murmured to the dog. "Keep an eye on her." The words weren't tender, but they meant she wasn't invisible here. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. She thought she might have found the last place on Earth that wouldn't turn her away. She had no idea the real trouble hadn't even started yet. The first light of dawn was pale silver when Laya coaxed the stove back to life. Soon the kitchen filled with the smells of bacon, biscuits, and coffee. By the time the ranch hands filed in, boots scuffing, spurs clinking, the table was set. Laya kept her head bent, but she felt their glances. They were curious, assessing the quiet slip of a girl who had appeared out of nowhere. When Caleb came in, the room shifted. He took his place at the head of the table, tipped his hat back, and ate. But when his gaze passed over Laya, just a brief, unreadable flick, she felt her pulse trip. By midday, She was elbow-deep in bread dough when one of the ranch hands leaned against the doorframe. He was lanky, straw-haired, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You're the new cook," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said simply. "Town's already talking. Guess they say you ain't from here." She kept kneading. "I'm here now." He smirked. "Sure. Just saying. Folks like to know where a body comes from. Makes 'em easier to trust." He left the screen door banging behind him. The dough sagged in her hands. Trust. That was always the word they used when they meant you didn't belong. The next day, Caleb sent her into town for supplies. The moment she dismounted at the mercantile, she felt the eyes on her. Inside, the shopkeeper's wife stood with her arms folded. "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "didn't expect to see a Harlow here?" Lia's hand tightened on the list Caleb had given her. "I need coffee, flour, salt, and sugar." "Caleb McGrath taking you on?" the woman asked, her gaze sweeping over Lia's dusty boots and patched dress. "Yes." A hiss of sound passed through the room. The woman exchanged a glance with her husband. "You be careful out there, girl. Folks remember things. They remember what happened back east." Lia paid and left, whispers trailing after her like burrs. By the time she got back to the ranch, her throat ached with swallowed words. That night, she heard two ranch hands lingering near the door, their voices low. "Her pa ran off with somebody's money. Whole family near run out of town." The other voice was skeptical. "She don't look like trouble." The first voice was grim. "Trouble never does, at first." Their boots crunched away. Lia stood very still, the water in the wash basin growing cold around her wrists. She didn't cry. Instead, she dried her hands, pulled down the flour sack, and began to make an apple pie. The next morning, the pie was waiting on the table. She didn't say why she'd made it, but she heard the murmurs of approval. Later, Caleb found her sweeping the kitchen. "Town can be cruel," he said quietly. "Yes." "You aiming to stay?" "Yes." He nodded once, as if that was all he needed to know. "Then keep cooking." Something unknotted in her chest. It was enough to keep her standing. But that night, as she sat on the porch steps, a coyote yipped, lonely and sharp. A floorboard creaked behind her. Caleb stood in the doorway, his face shadowed. "Word spreading," he said, his voice low. "I'll hear more tomorrow." She nodded, her heart thudding. "Best be ready," he added, and shut the door. Lia stared into the dark until her eyes burned. Tomorrow, she thought, was not coming kindly. And she was right. The trouble started small. The kitchen water pump handle was bent. The metal warped just enough that she scraped her knuckles raw trying to work it. She was still struggling, sweat rolling down her temple, when Caleb's shadow fell over her. He squatted beside her, examining the damage without a word. "You'll tear it worse that way," he said quietly. His hands, big and calloused, moved with a surprising patience. "Hold this steady." Together they worked in a rhythm as natural as breathing. She braced the pump while he loosened the bolts, their shoulders brushing once, quick as a spark. When the water finally gushed free, it splashed over both of them. She gasped, half laughing, wiping the cool water from her face. Caleb just looked at her for a moment, and something in his gaze lingered before he stood and walked back to the barn. That look stayed with her all day, a strange warmth coiled in her chest. That night, a storm rolled in, bruising the horizon black. The air turned metallic, charged. When the rain hammered down, Lia stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the sharp scent of wet earth. The door creaked open behind her. Caleb stood there, his hair plastered dark from the rain. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and held it out. "You'll catch your death." She took it, the coat heavy and warm from his body, smelling of leather and smoke. They stood there together, rain drumming, thunder rolling over the land. When lightning split the sky, It lit his face for a heartbeat. Strong, worn, lonely. "Why did you come here?" he asked at last, his voice nearly lost in the storm. "Because there was nowhere else to go," she whispered. He turned his head, studying her. "That the truth?" "Yes." The word was small, almost swallowed by the thunder. He nodded once and said nothing more. But the fragile peace was shattered 2 days later. Laya walked out to the smokehouse, and the smell hit her first, sharp and sour. She threw the door open. Inside, the racks of meat, a month's worth of work, hung blackened and ruined. Her heart pounded. 2 ranch hands approached, their gait deliberate. It was the lanky one, Jed, and his friend. "Looks like somebody didn't watch the coals," Jed said, his voice loud. "I banked them last night," Laya said, her throat tight. "Funny thing," the other man said, squinting. "Nobody saw you do it." Just then, Caleb strode across the yard. "What happened?" he asked, his voice even. "She burned the meat," Jed said. "Costing you a month's profit, boss." Laya's throat burned with unspoken protests. Caleb's eyes found hers, steady, unreadable. For a long moment, she was sure he would send her away. Instead, he looked at the 2 men. "Go cool off," he said. They hesitated, but obeyed. When they were gone, Caleb turned to her. "Did you do this?" Her pride flared. "No." He studied her, his silence heavier than any accusation. Then he nodded once. "I believe you." The breath left her lungs in a dizzying rush, but the reprieve was short-lived. That night she heard the men gathered outside the bunkhouse, their voices a low murmur of dissent. One voice rose above the rest, bitter and sharp. It was Jed. "He's letting her ruin this place. If he won't send her packing, maybe we ought to make it too hard for her to stay." She closed the door, her heart thundering. The next morning, a hen was dead by the coop, its neck broken. The day after, the well bucket was missing. Each small cruelty was a message. Caleb saw it all. He found her hauling water from the trough, her face grim. He took the buckets from her hands. "You're not leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she answered, breathless. "Then stop fighting them with silence. Let me deal with this." She shook her head. "They'll say you're protecting me because—" She broke off, heat rising in her face. "Because of what?" "Because of the way you look at me," she blurted, the words pulled from somewhere deep and frightened. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then he said, his voice low, "Let them talk." The next day, he sent Jed and his friend to work a far pasture. Jed cursed, but he went. Laya watched from the porch, a strange mix of relief and guilt in her chest. When the men returned at supper, the tension was a thick, choking cloud. Laya served them in silence. Jed shoved his plate back, spilling beans. "I won't eat what's given, or you won't eat at all," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. Jed muttered something under his breath. "Outside," Caleb said. Laya stood frozen in the doorway, listening to the sharp, angry words exchanged in the dark. When Caleb came back in, his expression was like stone. "He won't trouble you again." She knew better. Men's grudges didn't just vanish. That night, she packed her satchel. She was staring at it, torn, when Caleb stepped into the kitchen. He set a sack of flour on the table, and his eyes fell on her bag. "Thinking of running?" "I was." "You can," he said. "No one will stop you. But if you stay knowing this is your place." Her throat ached. "Why do you care if I stay?" He was silent for a long time. "Because this land is hard enough without good people being driven off it." He left, closing the door softly. Laya sat there until the lantern burned low. At last, she rose, untied the satchel, and put her things away. She would stay. The next morning, she rose before dawn and baked bread. When Caleb came in, she met his eyes and held them. He nodded, something fierce and proud in the gesture. But as the sun climbed higher, the sound of hoofbeats came from the road fast and hard. She stepped onto the porch. 3 riders were coming, dust pluming behind them like smoke. Whatever choice she had made, the world was about to answer back. And it wasn't going to be a quiet conversation. The riders thundered into the yard, dust swirling around them. The lead rider, a rangy man with a crooked grin, swung down from his horse. It was Jed, the hand Caleb had confronted, and he hadn't come alone. "McGrath," he said, tipping his hat in a gesture that was pure mockery. "Town's talking. Said you're keeping bad company." Caleb's jaw tightened. "This is my land. I decide who stays." Jed's gaze slid to Laya. She gripped the porch rail, her knuckles white. "A girl like that brings trouble. Best think twice before tying her name to yours." Jed's grin widened, especially a Harlow. He let the name hang in the air. "My father remembers your father, girl. Remembers the $50 that went missing the same day your old man skipped town." The air went still. So that was it, the root of the poison. It wasn't just gossip. It was a story of theft, a family debt. "My father never stole a cent in his life," Laya said, her voice shaking but clear. Jed just laughed. "That's not how my pa tells it." He turned back to Caleb. "You want her? You can have her. But that debt is yours now, McGrath, and the interest is steep." Caleb didn't raise his voice. "You said what you came to say. Get off my place." The riders spat, wheeled their horses, and rode off, their laughter trailing behind them like a curse. The yard fell silent. Caleb turned to Laya, his face unreadable. "You all right?" She nodded. "I'm not leaving." Something flickered in his expression. Relief. "Good," he said. That night Jed came back. He didn't ride into the yard. He used the cover of darkness to get to the bunkhouse. Laya saw the lantern light flicker, heard the low, angry voices. Jed wasn't just a troublemaker. He was a poison, turning the other hands against Caleb, using Laya's name as his weapon. The next morning, halfway through breakfast, the new man, a quiet kid named Billy, shoved his chair back. "I'm done with this," he said, his eyes on the table. "I won't work where a thief's daughter gets more respect than honest men." One by one, 3 other men stood with him. Jed had done his work well. The room went still. Caleb set his fork down, slow and precise, and rose to his feet. "You've had your say. Take your gear and ride." The men stared, disbelieving. "You'd fire us? All of us? Over her?" Caleb's gaze was like ice. "I'd fire you for letting another man do your thinking, for turning on one of your own." The men cursed, shoved away from the table, and stalked out. Within the hour they were gone, 4 fewer hands right before the big cattle drive. Laya stood in the kitchen, stacking dishes, her hands trembling. Caleb lingered in the doorway. "You stood your ground," he said. "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," he said. "Sometimes that's more than enough." Their eyes met, and the air between them felt heavy with everything they hadn't said. That night, she found him on the porch, watching the sun rise. He leaned against the post, arms crossed. "You've done more than cook," he said. "You've put this place back together." She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I was a lonely man before you came," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Didn't know how much until you started filling this house with good food and quiet." Her throat tightened. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You belong here, Laya." The words landed in her chest like a benediction. That evening, he set an extra lantern on the table. He took the seat across from her, not at the head of the table, but close. She served him bread, and when he reached for it, his fingers brushed hers. The touch sent a shiver through her. "Stay and eat," he said, an invitation. She did. After, he sat back, studying her. "You're not just the cook here," he said at last. Her breath caught. You're the reason this place feels like home." The lantern light flickered between them. For the first time, she met his gaze without flinching. But their peace was fragile. The next afternoon, Billy, the quiet kid who'd been fired, rode back into the yard. He was alone, and he looked terrified. "Mr. McGrath," he stammered, sliding from his horse. "It's Jed. He's not just talking. He's planning. Him and his pa, they're saying that if you won't pay the debt, they're going to take it out of your hide. They're coming tonight, and they're bringing fire." The air went cold. This was no longer about a girl with a bad name. It was about a ranch, a blood debt, and a promise of violence under the cover of dark. The fight for Laya's place had just become a fight for their lives. "How many?" Caleb's voice was flat, all business. Billy swallowed hard. "6, maybe 7. Jed, his pa, and their kin. They've been drinking since noon." Caleb nodded once, his eyes already scanning the ranch yard, calculating angles, defensive positions. The quiet rancher was gone. In his place was a commander. "Go inside, Laya. Bolt the door." She didn't move. "I can shoot." He looked at her, at the fierce resolve in her eyes, and didn't argue. "All right. The kitchen window gives you a clear shot of the main gate. Billy, you take the barn loft. Holler if they come from the south." The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. He had chosen his side. They worked in the fading light, barricading windows, placing rifles. The ranch, once a place of quiet work, became a fortress. The setting sun bled across the prairie, painting the clouds in shades of blood and fire. The silence was the worst part. The waiting. The only sounds were the creak of the windmill and the lowing of the nervous cattle. Laya stood at the kitchen window, a heavy Winchester in her hands. Her knuckles were white. She thought of her father, of the accusations that had shattered their family. She thought of the whispers that had followed her for years. Tonight, the whispers had come with guns. As darkness fell, a flicker of light appeared on the horizon. Torches. "They're coming," Caleb said from the porch, his voice a low rumble. They came not as a disorganized mob, but with a cold, deliberate purpose. They fanned out, their torches casting long, dancing shadows. Jed and his father, a hard-faced man with eyes like chips of flint, rode in the center. "McGrath!" the father bellowed. "Last chance! Send out the girl and we'll call it even!" "She's not going anywhere!" Caleb shouted back. "Then we'll burn you to the ground!" A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof of the bunkhouse. The dry wood caught instantly. Flames licked toward the sky. The world exploded into a nightmare of gunfire and firelight. Laya fired, the rifle bucking against her shoulder. She worked the lever, fired again, her movements mechanical, focused. She saw a man fall, another stumble back. From the barn, Billy's rifle cracked, steady and sure. Caleb moved like a ghost in the shadows, his pistol barking. He was a different man, a man who knew the deadly geometry of a firefight. But they were outnumbered. The fire was spreading, the smoke choking the air. Another torch landed on the porch of the main house. "Laya, get back!" Caleb yelled. She was about to pull away from the window when she saw it. A small metal box half buried under a loose floorboard near the hearth, dislodged by the chaos. She had swept over that spot 100 times. Acting on pure instinct, she dropped to her knees and pried it open. Inside was a small leather-bound ledger. She flipped it open. The handwriting was her father's. It was a logbook. Dates, names, amounts, and a final entry, dated the day he disappeared. Jedediah's father came for the loan, paid in full, said he was heading west to buy land. I wish him well. Paid in full. The story was a lie. Her father hadn't stolen anything. He'd been framed. Jed's father had taken the money and created a story to cover his tracks. "Caleb!" she screamed, holding up the book. Just then, the front door burst open. Jed stood there, his face demonic in the firelight, a pistol in his hand. "It's over!" he snarled. Before he could fire, a shot rang out from the darkness. Jed jerked, a look of surprise on his face, and crumpled to the ground. Billy stood in the barn doorway, his rifle smoking. The other men, seeing Jed fall and the fight turning against them, lost their nerve. They fled into the night, leaving the burning ranch behind them. The fight was over. Laya ran onto the porch, the ledger clutched in her hand, and showed it to Caleb. He read the last entry, his face grim. "He lied," Caleb said. "All these years, he built his life on a lie." They worked through the night, beating back the flames, saving what they could. By dawn, the bunkhouse was a smoldering ruin, but the main house and the barn were saved. They were battered, exhausted, but they were alive. As the sun rose, the sheriff and a posse finally rode into the yard. They had Jed's father in cuffs. Billy had ridden to town the second the fight was over, the truth finally coming to light. Laya stood on the porch, watching the lawman lead the old man away. The whispers were finally over. Her family's name was cleared. Caleb came to stand beside her. He reached out, slow and careful, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. "There's work ahead," he said. "Always will be." She turned to face him. "I'm staying." "I know," he said, and this time he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. The prairie spread wide before them, the sky washed clean. The West took everything. Your name, your pride, your last scrap of hope. But sometimes, if you stood your ground, it gave you something back, a place to stand, a table to sit at, a soul to look at across the fire. The lantern inside the kitchen had burned out, but the morning sun was spilling golden light across the threshold. Caleb's hand found hers, a promise unspoken but understood. She was no longer a girl running from her past. She was a woman standing at the edge of a future that was finally, blessedly hers. What do you think? Does a person's past define them, or do their actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and finding a home, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales you won't hear anywhere else.